Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen speaking. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis channel. This particular vlog is titled Trauma, Change Work, and Self-Defense Training. I highly recommend, if you work with trauma, that you either learn to do basic self-defense training or that you hook up with someone who has those skills and capacities. Now, when I talk about self-defense training, I'm not really talking about martial arts or sports fighting, even though that's useful. If you want to talk about self-defense, you want to have a program or system that teaches people how to avoid situations, to understand predator-prey interactions, street smarts. You need a way to verbally diffuse situations, learn how to negotiate, learn how to verbally deal with stuff. You need a way to deal with actual real-time attacks, not choreography in a dojo, or someone who attacks you according to a certain protocol or a certain style, but someone who really wants to take your head off for real. And you need a way to deal with the aftermath of a confrontation, meaning how do you deal with a police interrogation? How do you deal with the legal system? These are all elements that are highly relevant to actual self-defense training. So while stuff like sparring can certainly be very useful if you're practicing martial arts such as Muay Thai or mixed martial arts or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or boxing or wrestling, you know, that type of stuff is very useful and builds a lot of capacities that are relevant, but it's not really self-defense training because you've never had someone in a robe, come up to an ATM machine and kind of start jabbing you and go, hey, where's the money? It doesn't work like that. So when I talk about self-defense training, I'm talking about doing real simulations, having protective gear like plexiglass helmets, having some sort of protective suit that has the ability to absorb punishment so that you don't get hurt, or injured, but so that the shot still hurts, so that you don't develop any Superman tactics, so that you can play out roles, dialogue, rage attacks, sucker punches, two-on-one scenarios, weapon scenarios, with very decent contact and high speed. And what you'll discover when you do these types of simulations is that even though people might intellectually know that it's not real, it's fake, they still respond as if it's real. They get the shortness of breath, the hyperventilation, the loss of fine motor skills, the chaos, the adrenaline, the same type of psychophysiological responses that you're very likely to have in a real encounter. Now, why am I talking about this in the context of trauma and in the context of psychotherapy, whether you use hypnosis or NLP or some other modality? Well, think about it. One of the requirements for being traumatized, for some event or memory to become coded as a trauma, is the perception of inescapability. I'll repeat that once again. It's the perception of inescapability. The perception that I'm stuck, I don't have a solution, I don't have a way out. So this partly explains how some people can go through horrible events, but they're not traumatized. And they're not traumatized due to, in large part, that they didn't have and or still don't have a perception of inescapability around that particular event. It also explains how some people can experience stuff that, objectively speaking, wasn't that horrible, or they can even imagine something or hear about someone else's misfortune and still be traumatized. People can be traumatized, due to feeling ridiculed in a public speaking situation, for example, due to the perception that they're stuck and they don't really have an escape. So if you have had a client who has experienced a mugging, some sort of assault, accident, um, or rape or rape attempt, and they're traumatized, there's a sense of inescapability associated with those particular memory constructs. And sometimes doing real-time self-defense simulations where you can kind of recreate the experience and unfreeze it, unlock it, help their brain develop options, a way out, so to speak, can be a very useful way of dealing with the trauma. So I'll give you one particular case story from my practice. And I've written about this particular case story in my book, Provocative Suggestions. So if any one of you want more detail on this or want to get more into it, then reading Provocative Suggestions is a really good step. Now, this particular client is a client who I had seen for another issue in the past. And one evening she called, and she told me that she had been mugged and attempted raped. I think it was 1 week or 2 weeks previously, before she called. She had left a garden party one evening, had a couple of drinks, nothing too dramatic. Walked home into the apartment complex where she lived, and once inside the gate, there was a guy there waiting for her, staring at her. He had this predatory look, and he cussed her out, and he called her a fucking whore. Charged at her, punched her in the face pretty hard, slammed her to the ground, mounted her, and started the attempted rape. Now, all she was able to do was essentially to freeze and to let out a little scream. But other than that, she froze. Now, he made a lot of sound. Enough sound so that at least one neighbor who had some courage and a spine, the balls to intervene, instead of calling the cops or sitting inside, he actually went out to deal with the scumbag. And the scumbag, the would-be rapist, took off. And as a result, the rape was aborted. It didn't happen. But this particular client was shook up, and she experienced numbness. She experienced huge mood swings, irritability, problems sleeping, flashbacks. Had a very, very horrible experience with this. She went to the police. The police didn't really do much. So there was no case to speak of, no actual investigation into anything, which is very unfortunate. Now, when she called me and she described this on the phone, she leaned on a particular sentence, and she leaned on it several times. So when I say lean on, I mean that she kind of marked the sentence out and leaned on the words. And the words were, "I just froze." This happened 4 or 5 times during the conversation. I just froze. Now, this is a gift from the unconscious, metaphorically speaking. If you're astute and you listen to what the client actually say, you will very often hear these types of golden nuggets, which it essentially tells you what your job is. It tells you how to create a context to help that particular client make a change. The client just essentially told me, help me unfreeze the experience. I have a frozen representation or memory construct inside of me. So I got a friend who's also studied self-defense with me. I used to teach self-defense for about 16 years professionally, in addition to the change work that I do. And I had him don a high gear suits, the types that Tony Blauer sells. He's also a good resource if you're looking for information about how to do simulations. Um, a lot of training videos and stuff like that that you could purchase. So we used my house, which by her description, the entrance, the gate, didn't seem that different. So I instructed my client to meet at my office in a tracksuit, and she found it kind of funny because she realized that we were gonna do something, and I had her wear the protective gear, and I had my friend wear the protective gear, and I had him cuss at her and call her a fucking whore and charge her. And once again, she froze. She completely froze. And on the first take, so to speak, I had to take hold of her arms and claw his face. Now he had a plexiglass helmet, so I had to do the clawing and the raking and the eye gouging and the ear pulling and the elbows and the headbutts and the spitting and the biting, well, not the biting, but I had to guide her body to do those things because she froze. Now, even though she intellectually knew that this was fake, she intellectually knows that she's not really being raped or attempted rape. She responded as if it was real. She activated the same neural networks that were active during the results. And once you activate that, those networks, those memory constructs become very malleable. They become very open to change, open to adjustments, open to unfreezing, which is what we were looking to do. So we did the simulation several times. She almost puked. It was that strong and that real for her. But you want to make it real. You want to really activate it. You want that strong internet connection. So after a few takes, she was able to fight on her own. She was able to do the raking and the clawing and the elbows and the ear grabbing and what have you. And as a result, she unfroze the experience. This is what her unconscious metaphorically had told me. Help me unfreeze my experience. So after this session and after this work, the symptoms completely disappeared. All the PTSD-like symptoms that she had after the attempted rape vanished. So I've done this on a few occasions with clients who have had muggings and attempted rapes and rapes. I've had them at my self-defense school, and we've gone through simulations where we have done our best to simulate and replicate the actual experiences to unfreeze them. So this can be a very valuable type of intervention that's worth knowing how to do, or it's worth knowing someone who knows how to do that type of stuff. So I really recommend that you look into it. Notice also a couple of other teachings here. In this particular instance, I mean, there's always several ways of unfreezing an experience. I could have guided her to see that the event was over and that what she experiences now is actually a thought construct. I could have guided her to see that. I could have done other types of interventions. But for some clients, some of the time, taking them out into the real world, into the real contexts, can be the difference that makes a difference. Like I've had anorectics and taken them to restaurants and tipped off the waiters and the people who worked there to be my actors to create a context for change. So be willing to think in terms of how can I use the real world as an arena. That's really important. Also notice the marked out sentence, I just froze. When people start describing their their context, or their experience. Notice when they seem to light up. Notice when their physiology, seems to change. That's that's a key. When I ask people questions, I usually ask the questions not to get verbal answers. I ask them mostly to access a state, to get a non-verbal response. So to be able to see when does the client kind of perk up, when does the client activate, that gives you information on where to move. And also listen closely. Take what the person is saying literally. So if someone leans on the sentence, as in this case, I just froze. I just froze. Well, that tells you, again, that they have a frozen representation. And that your job in creating a context is to help them to somehow unfreeze the experience. Now, if you unfreeze the experience, you're no longer traumatized. Your brain has a solution. Even if it's a solution created during a simulation, it's still as real at the level of experience. So that is something to deeply consider as well. So really listen in, and when you get those golden nuggets, it's time to do something. I'll give you one more example of just listening in. I had a deeply depressed client once who talked about his horrible past that got in the way, and when he talked about the past, he gestured straight in front of him, and when he talked about the future, he kind of reached over the past. And I asked him, and I discovered that he was very visually oriented. I discovered that he was literally viewing the future through the filter of the past. No wonder that the guy felt really stuck. So all I really had to do with him was to create a timeline, so to speak, where we switched his past so that it was behind him and so that he could see the future in front of him. Really simple intervention, but had dramatic, life-changing consequences. So I hope this was useful. Once again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them. Where you find this on social media or on the Provocative Hypnosis YouTube channel. And if you haven't subscribed to it, do. There's a lot of interesting information. There's regular videos. And until next time, have a great day.